It was a sunny April afternoon.
Hey, we got 45 caliber shell casings here at the scene. One of the victims is advising that there is a woman and kids inside the house. We've got forced entry into the residence, possibly victims inside.
Former NFL player Phillip Adams hopped on a four-wheeler and left the Rock Hill house where he lived with his parents. His father remembers it being just a normal day, but this was the moment that would change their lives forever.
There was another awful shooting, this one in South Carolina. A doctor, his wife, two of their young grandchildren among the 5 who were killed in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And tonight authorities believe it was a former NFL player who killed them before killing himself.
Phillip Adams. Phillip Adams.
It's Phillip Adams.
Phillip Adams, the NFL player turned mass murderer, a man who was at the top of his profession but decided to trade it all for 6 lives in an act of unforgiving violence. The motive may still be a question, but today we will figure out how he got to this point and find the reason he felt like he needed to take 6 innocent lives on top of his own. This is the sinister story of Phillip Adams. The story begins before the fame. As just a kid in Rock Hill, South Carolina, things seemed pretty good for Phillip. He came from a normal family, attended the public high school, and was a standout athlete. Alonzo Adams, Phillip's father, said Phillip didn't talk much and he didn't bother nobody. See, he was just a quiet kid. He lived in the gym and his life was all about football. Just like many high school athletes, Phillip had a dream to play Division I ball, and luckily for him, that dream was about to come true. But what they didn't know is that decision may have been what ended his life. In 2004, Adams was part of the Rock Hill Bearcats, a team that won a Class 4A Division I state championship in South Carolina. He was also on the basketball team and led them to the state championship as well. Coming up those rings, Phillip got the opportunity to go and play for South Carolina State, a Division I FCS program not too far from his family. In his freshman year with the Bulldogs, Adams saw action as a backup and on special teams. He recorded 12 tackles and 2 interceptions along with a 30-yard punt return. By no means was this kid a standout in his early years, but one thing Phillip knew was how to grind. His coaches said that he lived in the weight room and often even overworked himself to the point where they would have to tell him to tone it down. But you see, this work, it paid off. As a sophomore, Phillip played in 11 games and by his junior year, ranked 6th on the team in tackles and led them in interceptions along with pass deflections. All of a sudden, Phillip was a star in SC. In his senior year, he was a first-team all-conference selection after registering 48 tackles and 3 interceptions. That year, he also scored a touchdown on a pick 6 against Norfolk State. Now, although Phillip was excelling on the field, off the field, some red flags started to appear. See, Phillip had a couple head injuries during his career, but in 2006, concussions, they were just a part of the game. Helmets weren't built to prevent them. Studies had not been done to see how harmful they are. If you were complaining about a headache, you were just labeled as soft, so you kept playing. Phillip was quiet. He was never one to make that complaint. He wanted to be tough. He wanted to prove himself as a player and a leader. So often, he played through that pain. He may not have been listed as concussed in any of his games, but according to his father, Phillip often called home complaining about headaches. Alonzo Adams, his father, claims that South Carolina State showed negligence, carelessness, recklessness, and willfulness that motivated his son to play through these injuries and not receive the proper care. In the moment, this all seemed fine, but knowing what we know now, this should have been red flag number 1. However, let's focus back on the field. Although he was playing at the FCS level, Adams was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in the 7th round of the 2010 NFL Draft. Realistically, only about 1 to 2% of 7th round picks ever end up having a career in the NFL. But for Phillip, his work ethic proved otherwise. He fought through that whole season with the 49ers for a chance to play, and he finally got it. He earned a spot on special teams that season, but it quickly all came crashing down. See, in week 16 against the St. Louis Rams on December 26, 2010, he broke his left ankle while blocking on the opening kickoff of the second half. The injury required Adams to have surgery, which included several screws being inserted into his leg. This ultimately led to the 49ers releasing Phillip. Now, for most players, an injury like this would mean certain death of an NFL career, especially a guy drafted in the 7th round. But in this case, it wasn't for Adams. His agent Scott Casterline played a very important role in his career. The two grew very, very close through this journey. When asked about Phillip as a player, Casterline said Phillip was a real lone ranger. He really just liked to be by himself, alone, even when he played. I loved Phillip like a brother. The Phillip that we knew was a really good person, quiet, He was a loner, but he was good. He was a good person. From that point on, Phillip would become an NFL journeyman. He bounced around from team to team, first the Patriots, then the Seahawks, then Oakland, New York, Atlanta. His teammates knew this was a guy who was just going to grind it out. Former Cowboys cornerback Kevin Smith, who trained with Adams leading up to the 2010 draft and stayed friends with him after he entered the league, spoke about Adams. Smith emphasized how much Phillip trained, even overworked. He said Phillip never drank or did drugs. He also mentioned Adams liked fast cars and sometimes he drove a little bit too fast. I used to have to tell him, "You don't have to do so much," Smith said. I would tell him it's about preserving your body because he'd want to work out 3 times a day. His agent said Phillip was one of the most determined athletes he'd ever been around. He wanted to be great and he did all the things necessary to be great. He just worked on the game. See, Phillip Adams, he was addicted to football. This was his life, the grind, everything about it. But that injury, he felt like it derailed his career forever. And this was a guy who wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of his success. So Phillip continued to battle through pain and injury each season to fight for a roster spot. What in the moment seemed like the tough, right thing to do, turned out to be a tragedy waiting to happen. See, during a 3-game span with the Raiders in 2012, Adams had 2 concussions. I mean, I'm not sure how many of you saw what happened with Tua Tagovailoa after he suffered 2 concussions in 3 weeks, but the side effects on your brain can be catastrophic. Phillip's family said that he would often complain at this point about chronic pain and excruciating headaches towards the end of his career, but he kept playing. Because if he stopped, he wouldn't have been eligible for a broad settlement between the league and former players over the long-lasting concussion-related injuries. The NFL requires players to play a certain length to reap any sort of post-career benefits. Adams' last opportunity to play in the NFL came with the Indianapolis Colts, but by the time his agent Castelline was able to get in touch with him, he had completely missed his flight to Indianapolis. At this point, Phillip was checked out of football. Now, after football can be an incredibly hard transition, especially for players with deteriorating mental health. But for Phillip, he actually seemed to be doing pretty well. A friend of the family, C.T. Kirk, said that Adams had plans in motion to give back to Rock Hill, including starting a business that provided healthy food options to families who couldn't afford them. Castelline said that Adams planned to start a juice company prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but he didn't think that worked out, so Adams ended up spending some time with the Rock Hill High School football team. And in the fall, Adams actually had called Castelline for help finding a job. Castelline said that he'd be happy to help him if Adams ever wanted to come live in Dallas, Texas, but you see, Phillip never wanted to leave South Carolina. There were points where Adams had lived with Castelline, and he said that he was well liked by his family. Oftentimes, struggles athletes face when their playing careers are over get swept under the rug, but life after a career as a professional athlete can be very difficult for many reasons. It's a brutal transition. Part of it is you have to be an adult now, but mainly the locker room, working as a team, being around guys every day in a locker room, and then all of a sudden you're not. For your whole life, you're working towards a common goal, and then suddenly you're all alone. This, combined with his mental health fading, slowly began to eat away at Phillip. According to his sister, the family had noticed concerning signs of rapidly deteriorating mental health, like an escalating temper and a lack of personal hygiene. But they believed that this wasn't anything too out of the ordinary. That was until April 7th, 2021, around 4:45 p.m. Dr. Robert Leslie was a prominent doctor in Rock Hill. He treated patients at Riverview Family Medical and Urgent Care. The Leslie family, they were longtime members of the First ARP Church in Rock Hill. Their grandkids, Barbara and Robert Leslie, sang in the kids' choir. This was a happy family. And on April 7th, the kids were dropped off at the grandparents' house, as well as James Lewis and Robert Shook. See, Lewis and Shook, they weren't part of the family, but they were just there to do normal HVAC work on the Leslie home. The day seemed to be going as planned, until a man on a 4-wheeler pulled up to the Leslie residence. Without warning, he began to open fire on everyone in sight. Robert Shook actually survived the initial shooting and was able to call his employer to alert him on what was happening. That man provided the only 911 call that day.
And my 2 technicians are there. One just called me. He can't talk. He's screaming, "I've been shot, I've been shot." And I asked him where the other one is. He said he's laying there and he's unresponsive, and he was shot also. I can't get any other information out of him.
Deputies arrived on the scene, finding the innocent victims lifeless. Quickly, the hunt for the killer was on. At the shooting scene, deputies found Adams' cell phone and other evidence that pointed to Phillip Adams, including bullet casings that matched guns found in his house. Also, a police car dash cam found a video showing the same 4-wheeler being driven near the scene after the shootings. They quickly realized who they were dealing with and headed to Phillip's home, where they found he had taken his own life. Deputies searched the home and and found a journal with cryptic writings. Still to this day, nobody had been able to decipher what he was writing. There was never a motive, never a connection. Police still believed that this was a complete random act of violence. Adams left no suicide note, and deputies interviewed dozens of people and found no clear motive. They said only one person, Phillip Adams, knew the motive, and that person is not here. The autopsy revealed Adams was not on any drugs besides a normal level of amphetamines for headaches, but it also revealed what still to this day is the most shocking part. See, Adams' brain was sent to be studied by experts at Boston University. They found he had an abnormally severe chronic brain injury called CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is a disease brought on by a history of repetitive brain trauma. It's often seen in athletes or war combat veterans. All the concussions, all the times Adams played through injury just trying to make a career, it was slowly killing him, and he had no idea. The story of Phillip Adams is a tragic one. In no way is this brain disease an excuse for the senseless acts of violence that he committed. Those were innocent lives he took, and we send prayers to the families and everyone who was involved in this. But it should serve as an eye-opener for the thousands of athletes taking part in the sport that we love. Playing this game is not the issue. It's the culture that has been built around it. If you're a football player watching this, I just ask you to be vocal and speak up about injuries, especially things resulting in your head. It's 2024. Nobody's gonna think you're soft. Nobody's gonna think you're weak. The blame is not on you. An athlete's mental strength should be just as important as their physical strength. The two are hand in hand, but one will last a lifetime. I'm All Hail Cullen, and make sure you join us on this mission by clicking subscribe, although this one was undoubtedly a bit darker. We will be posting documentary style videos on this channel every single week. So until next time, stay safe out there. I'm Cullen. Peace.